There are moments in a woman's life when everything she thought she had figured out quietly stops being enough, and most men are completely unprepared for what she needs in those moments. Not because the men are absent, not because they stopped caring, but because what she needs at these specific points in her life looks different from what she needed before. And nobody ever explained to the men around her that the rules had changed. Most men operate on a model of female need that is essentially static. They calibrate to who she was when they first understood her, and they continue offering that version of support indefinitely. It feels loyal. It feels consistent. But at certain ages, that consistency becomes a form of invisibility, because the woman standing in front of you is not the same woman she was, and what she needs from you has shifted in ways that are precise, real, and almost universally overlooked. There is a reason her need for a specific kind of strength concentrates at certain ages rather than fading across a lifetime. A reason why the timing follows a pattern. And a reason why the men who understand that pattern hold something in their relationships that most men never find. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what that pattern is. Most men operate on a simple assumption. The older and more independent a woman becomes, the less she needs from a man. That assumption is not only wrong, it is wrong in exactly the moments that matter most. This is worth examining carefully, because the assumption itself is not unreasonable. It is built on observation. You watch a woman build her career, raise children, manage her household, navigate her social world with extraordinary competence, and the natural conclusion is that her need for external support is diminishing. She looks self-sufficient. She presents as capable. And she genuinely is. But self-sufficiency and the absence of deep relational need are not the same thing. They never were. What developmental psychology has documented across decades of research is that human beings, women in particular, do not move through their lives in a smooth, linear arc of increasing independence. They move through phases. And between phases, there are threshold moments, periods of genuine internal reorganization, where the structures a person has built to make sense of themselves and their lives become temporarily insufficient for the next stage. These threshold moments are not weakness. They are growth. But they are growth that carries a specific kind of internal turbulence, and that turbulence creates a concentrated, acute need for a particular quality of presence from a male partner. The man who understands that this is a threshold, not a problem to be solved, not a regression to be corrected, holds a position of extraordinary relational significance. The man who does not understand it often experiences this period as confusing, frustrating, and threatening. He escalates effort in directions that do not help. He tries to restore something that was never meant to be restored. And the woman, unable to explain precisely what she needs, often concludes that he simply cannot give it. That misread happens at 3 specific ages, and the first one arrives sooner than most men expect. When a woman says she needs a strong man, she is almost never talking about what most men think she is talking about, and the gap between what she means and what he hears is where most relationships quietly lose something they never get back. The cultural image of male strength that most men carry internally is built around provision and protection, the capacity to supply resources, to shield from external threat, to take decisive action. And these things matter. They always will. But they do not address what a woman is actually reaching for when she says she needs strength from a man. What she is reaching for is something psychologists call co-regulation, the experience of having another person's nervous system help stabilize your own. In plain terms, when her internal world is in flux, when uncertainty is high and her emotional ground feels unstable, the presence of a man who is genuinely settled, not performing calm, not suppressing anxiety, but actually grounded, allows her nervous system to settle in response to his. This is regulatory strength, and it is categorically different from resource-based strength. A man demonstrating regulatory strength does not need the situation to resolve quickly. He does not need her to be certain when she is not. He does not become threatened or reactive when her emotional state is in motion. He can hold a clear internal direction while allowing her process to unfold at its own pace. And that steadiness, that unhurried quality of his presence, is experienced by her nervous system as safety. You might be thinking, is this not just being calm, being patient? And in some ways, yes. But there is a depth beneath ordinary patience that is harder to sustain and far more impactful when it is real. Patience can be gritted teeth behind a quiet face. Regulatory strength is the absence of the internal urgency that makes the gritting necessary. She feels the difference without being able to name it. With that foundation in place, we can look at the first of the three ages, and why what happens to a woman at this stage creates a need that, if met correctly, shapes everything that comes after. Around her late 20s, something changes in a woman that she may not be able to explain clearly. A quiet urgency begins to organize itself underneath the surface of her everyday life. And the man who understands what that urgency is asking for holds an extraordinary position. Between roughly 27 and 33, a woman experiences a convergence that is both biological and psychological. The social structures she built in her early adult years, her identity, her friendships, her sense of what her future would look like, begin to feel slightly too small. Not wrong exactly, just insufficient for where she is going. At the same time, questions she held abstractly about partnership, family, and long-term direction begin to feel concrete and pressing. And the social performance of independence, the carefully maintained image of a woman who needs nothing from anyone, starts to carry a cost she can feel but rarely admits. What she needs from a man at this age is directional stability. Not certainty about outcomes, life does not offer that. But a man who has a clear internal sense of where his life is going, who can hold that direction calmly without requiring her to validate it, and who does not become destabilized when she asks hard questions about the future. You have probably encountered a woman at this threshold at some point, and not known what you were looking at. She seemed fully capable in every external regard, successful, socially fluent, emotionally articulate. And yet something in her was seeking something specific that she could not quite ask for directly. The observable signal at this age is not dramatic. It is a woman who watches how a man handles uncertainty, rather than how he handles success. She listens for whether his sense of direction is internally generated, or externally dependent. Whether it wobbles when circumstances change, or holds steady across varying conditions. She is measuring something in him that she cannot fully articulate. Of course, this does not mean every woman in her late 20s is running this assessment consciously. Context matters enormously, and individual variation is real. But the underlying dynamic, a woman at a threshold seeking a man whose ground does not shift, is consistent enough across personalities and backgrounds that it functions almost as a developmental pattern. The most common mistake at this age is emotional intensity. A man who pursues strongly, who makes his feelings loudly known, who creates romantic pressure, often reads to a woman at this threshold as someone whose stability is unverified. She needs to feel the solidity before she can respond to the warmth. The late 20s threshold is intense, but the second age is different in kind, not just degree, and the kind of strength it requires is something most men are even less prepared for. The early 40s represent the threshold where more relationships end than at any other point. And almost universally, the reason is not what either person believes it to be. Remember what I said at the very beginning, that a woman's need for a specific kind of strength concentrates at certain ages rather than fading. This second age is where that concentration is most acute, and it is the one most consistently misread. What happens to a woman in her early to mid-40s is not the cultural cliché of midlife crisis. It is something quieter and more fundamental. Neurological research into adult development describes this period as a genuine reorganization of the self, a process in which the identity structures a woman built through her 20s and 30s become subject to deep internal questioning. Her roles, her relationships, her sense of who she is underneath all the things she does. All of it enters a kind of interior review that she did not choose and cannot simply decide to stop. She may become quieter, or suddenly more questioning, or restless in a way she cannot explain. She may begin pulling slightly away from the version of herself that the people around her expect. Not to be difficult, but because that version is genuinely beginning to feel like a coat that no longer fits. The man who tries to restore the previous version of the relationship during this period, who increases his efforts to recreate the dynamic that existed before, who becomes anxious at her questioning, who needs her to return to a familiar state, often accelerates the very withdrawal he is trying to prevent. His anxiety registers to her nervous system not as love, but as pressure. And pressure during a reorganization phase pushes a woman further inward, not back toward connection. What she actually needs from a man at this age is something that requires genuine internal development to provide. The capacity to be a stable, non-reactive witness to her process. Not a fixer. Not a worrier. Not someone who needs her to be certain while she is not. A witness. Someone who can remain warm and present while she moves through something he does not fully understand, without making his own comfort a requirement of her process. The observable shape of this, in daily life, is specific. She brings up a question. About the relationship, about her own direction, about something she is reconsidering. And the man who meets that question with genuine curiosity, rather than defensiveness or reassurance, creates something she will remember. He does not rush to resolve it. He does not become threatened by it. He stays in the question with her. That capacity, to remain steady inside uncertainty, to stay present without needing resolution, is the form regulatory strength takes at this age. And it is the form most men were never shown. The third age is the one almost nobody discusses. And yet the women who reach it without the right kind of male presence beside them describe the experience in terms that are quietly devastating. The third threshold arrives in a woman's late 50s to early 60s, and it asks something of a man that cuts closer to the bone than either of the first two. At this stage, 3 transitions are happening simultaneously. The active parenting role, if she had children, is largely complete, and the identity that organized itself around that role does not simply dissolve cleanly. It leaves a space that needs to be filled with something real. Her professional identity may also be shifting as she moves toward or through the later chapters of her career. And underneath both of these, something quieter is beginning. A conscious reckoning with time, with legacy, with what her life has meant, and what she still wants it to mean. Women at this threshold often feel profoundly unseen, not because the men in their lives are absent or unkind, but because those men are still relating to a version of her that stopped being fully accurate years ago. A man who met her at 40 carries an image of who she was at 40, and if he has not been genuinely curious about who she has been becoming since then, if his understanding of her is a photograph rather than a living map, she will feel that gap even if she cannot name it precisely. The strength required at this age is the capacity for genuine curiosity about who she is right now. Not who she was, not who he needs her to be for his own comfort. Who she is currently, what she is currently wondering about, what she still wants, what she is beginning to grieve. That curiosity, steady, patient, genuinely interested, is experienced by a woman at this age as one of the most profound forms of love she has ever received. And there is one more layer at this threshold that most explanations completely skip over. A woman in her late 50s is beginning, consciously or not, to face questions about mortality, meaning, and what comes next. Not dramatically, quietly, in the background of ordinary days. The man who can face those questions with her, who does not deflect them with humor or optimism or a change of subject, becomes irreplaceable in a way that has no equivalent at the earlier thresholds. Now that you can see all 3 ages clearly, the final question is not which one she is at. It is whether you understand what being strong actually costs, and why the men who are willing to pay that cost experience something in their relationships that most men never do. Understanding the 3 ages is one thing. Being the man she actually needs at each of them is something that asks more of you. Not more effort, but more of a specific kind of inner work that almost nobody talks about directly. Regulatory strength. The quality that runs through all three thresholds is built on three internal requirements. The first is the capacity to remain non-reactive in the face of a woman's emotional intensity without becoming cold or distant. This is subtler than it sounds. Many men manage one or the other. They stay warm but get pulled into her emotional turbulence, or they stay steady but go cool and unavailable. The requirement is to hold both simultaneously, warm enough that she feels met, grounded enough that she feels anchored. That combination is not natural for most men. It is developed. The second requirement is the ability to hold a direction when she is questioning everything, without using that direction as a form of control. A man who says, "This is where I am going," and means it, not as an ultimatum, not as a wall, but as a genuine expression of his own internal compass, provides something a woman at any threshold needs desperately. Proof that at least one person in the equation is not lost. The third requirement is the willingness to continue being genuinely curious about who she is at each new stage, rather than relating to a fixed historical version of her. This is perhaps the most demanding of the three, because it requires a man to release his existing image of the woman he loves and replace it with an open question. That is not easy. The existing image is comfortable. The open question is uncertain. You might be wondering whether these qualities are things you either have or you do not. They are not. They are capacities that develop through honest self-examination and deliberate practice. And here is what is worth sitting with. The development of regulatory strength does not only serve her. A man who can hold himself steady in another person's storm, who can remain curious when certainty would be easier, who can be present at someone's most difficult threshold without needing it to resolve on his schedule. That man is not just a better partner. He is a more complete version of himself. That inner work, quiet, unglamorous, and completely transformative, is exactly what separates the men women describe as irreplaceable from the men they simply remember. 3 ages, 3 different shapes of the same underlying need, and one quality: regulatory strength, the capacity to remain genuinely grounded while she moves through what she cannot yet name. That runs through all of them. The deeper truth underneath everything in this video is this: a woman does not need a man who has everything figured out. She needs a man who does not lose himself when she does not have everything figured out. That distinction is small in language and enormous in practice. You now have a map that most men never receive, not because this information is hidden, but because nobody sat down and explained it directly, in terms that were actually useful. The 3 ages, the 3 shapes of need, the one quality that makes the difference at each of them. You can see the pattern now. You do not need to turn every interaction into an analysis. You do not need to monitor her for threshold signals, or maintain a constant internal audit of where she is developmentally. Just carry this awareness quietly. When something in a relationship feels confusing, when what you are offering does not seem to be landing, when the gap appears despite genuine effort, you now have a framework for asking a better question than, "What am I doing wrong?" You can ask instead, "Where is she? And what does this stage actually need from me?" Which of these 3 ages do you think you understand best? And which one do you think most men, including yourself, are least prepared for? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. On this channel, every video is built around the kind of understanding that transfers directly into how you show up. Not theory for its own sake, but insight that changes something real in how you see and engage. In the next video, I'm going to show you what a woman's behavior during major life transitions reveals about her deepest attachment style, and why the man she quietly turns to in those moments is almost never the one she talks about most.